For 200,000 years, humans got taller, stronger, and healthier. Then, about 12,000 years ago, we invented farming. And almost overnight, evolutionarily speaking, humans got shorter, weaker, sicker, more malnourished than their ancestors had been in tens of thousands of years. We're taught that agriculture was the moment humanity leveled up, the moment we stopped surviving and started thriving. The skeletons say otherwise. Today we're looking at the actual physical evidence, bones, teeth, and disease markers, that farming might have been, in the words of one biologist, the worst mistake in the history of the human race. Let's start with something you can literally measure: height. Not vibes, not theory, actual bones, measured in labs by real archaeologists. Researchers studying skeletal remains across Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean found something that shouldn't happen if farming was really progress. Average human height actually dropped after the shift to agriculture. Late hunter-gatherer populations averaged around 5'9" for men and 5'5" for women. After farming took hold, down to about 5'3" for men and 5'1" for women. That's not a small dip. That's a measurable, population-wide shrinkage, the kind of change scientists usually only see after famine, war, or disease. Except this wasn't a temporary crisis. This was the new normal, for thousands of years. And here's the part that really puts it in perspective. It took until the 20th century, with modern medicine, sanitation, and consistent nutrition, for average heights in some of these regions to finally recover back to pre-agricultural levels. Not decades, not centuries. It took over 10,000 years to physically undo the damage of switching to farming. 10,000 years, just to get back to where our hunter-gatherer ancestors already were. Why did this happen? Hunter-gatherers ate an enormously varied diet: wild game, fish, nuts, roots, seasonal fruits, dozens of plant species depending on the region they lived in. Their nutrition was, on average, broad, balanced, and resilient. If one food source failed, there were a dozen others to fall back on. Early farmers didn't have that safety net. They staked their entire survival on one or two crops: wheat, barley, rice, or maize, depending on where they lived. That's a massive nutritional gamble. A diet built around a single starchy staple crop is calorie-dense but nutrient-poor. You get full, but you don't get what you actually need. And when that one crop failed, drought, blight, a bad season, there was nothing else to eat, no backup plan, no dozens of alternative food sources to fall back on. Skeletal evidence backs this up directly. Researchers studying ancient remains find spikes in something called enamel hypoplasia, horizontal grooves in tooth enamel caused by periods of malnutrition or illness during childhood. These grooves become dramatically more common after the transition to farming, a physical record, literally written into people's teeth, of just how fragile that new way of eating really was. Farming didn't just change diet, it changed how humans lived, and that made things worse. Agriculture meant permanent settlements. Permanent settlements meant population density. And population density is exactly the condition infectious disease needs to thrive. Hunter-gatherer bands were small, mobile, and constantly moving. Disease had nowhere to build momentum. But farming villages stayed put, for generations, in the same spot, with the same water source, the same soil, the same neighbors. Living close to domesticated animals, cattle, pigs, poultry, also opened the door to zoonotic diseases, illnesses that jump from animals to humans. Measles, tuberculosis, and influenza are all believed to have crossed into human populations because we started living beside livestock full-time, day after day, generation after generation. On top of that, permanent settlements meant permanent waste. You can't just walk away from it anymore. Sanitation in early agricultural villages was, by every archaeological account, terrible. Waste piling up near water sources, near food stores, near the same homes people slept in every night. And that meant parasites and waterborne illness became a constant presence, a daily risk that simply didn't exist for mobile hunter-gatherer bands, who left their waste behind every time they moved on. Here's the part that surprises people most. Hunter-gatherers likely worked less than early farmers. Anthropological studies of surviving hunter-gatherer societies, used as a rough proxy for prehistoric life, suggest many groups spent somewhere around 15 to 20 hours a week actually acquiring food. The rest of their time was free, for rest, social life, storytelling, craft. Farming flipped that completely, clearing land, tilling soil, weeding, guarding crops from animals, and from other humans, harvesting, processing grain by hand, day after day. Agricultural labor was relentless, physically punishing, and it never really stopped. There was no off-season, no long stretch of rest. Just the next task, and the next season after that. Skeletal remains from early farming populations show exactly what you'd expect from that kind of labor. Increased joint degeneration, spinal stress markers, and repetitive strain injuries. The kind you'd see in someone who spent decades doing hard physical work without relief. These injuries are far less common in hunter-gatherer skeletons from the same era. So if farming meant less food variety, more disease, and harder physical labor, why did we do it? This is the real twist. Farming almost certainly wasn't chosen because it made life better. It was likely adopted because it could support far more people per square mile than foraging ever could, even at a lower quality of life for each individual person. 1 acre of farmland could feed far more mouths than the same acre of wild forest or plain. So farming populations grew, and grew, faster than hunter-gatherer populations ever could. And once a population grows to match that food supply, there's no going back. You can't uninvent farming when there are 10 times more mouths to feed than the land could ever support any other way. There's no version of that world where everyone just returns to foraging. The math doesn't work anymore. It's a one-way door, a trap, built out of population growth itself, one no single generation ever chose, and no generation after them could undo. Agriculture didn't win because it made humans healthier, or taller, or freer. It won for one reason only: it could feed more people. Even weaker people, even sicker people, than any other way of life on Earth. And once that door closed behind us, there was no walking back through it. So the next time you hear agriculture called humanity's greatest leap forward, remember what the bones actually say. Shorter, sicker, working harder for less. It took thousands of years, and the invention of modern medicine, just to physically recover from a decision our ancestors probably never really chose. They just couldn't turn back from it. If you want the next one of these dropped straight into your feed, subscribe, because next week we're covering the 5,300-year-old body that solved and reopened one of history's coldest murder cases.